Uploading.
One of the most consistent attributes of the Trek universe is the fact that they are defined by the different eras the vessels were designed in. The Golden Age was personified in the Galaxy class, the Dominion War was personified in the Defiant class, and the Age of Growth, the time when Starfleet was arguably at its best, is personified by the Constitution class. The Constitution class, and her alternate variant designs, is possibly the most recognizable vessel in all of the fleet. It projects Starfleet strength and Federation ingenuity. It combines all of the best technologies of the various member worlds and was a ship used for scientific research, cargo delivery, political intrigue, as well as providing for the common defense. The Constitution class was considered a Class 1 heavy cruiser. It was given this designation because Starfleet is definitely not a military.
Starfleet is not a military organization. Its purpose is exploration.
There were at least 12 vessels in the fleet, all of which were given special missions of exploration to one degree or another. This fits well because the original design was intended so that the ship could be self-sufficient. It didn't need much outer support. The vessel was initially so powerful and iconic, Starfleet chose to keep these vessels in the background and as reserves when a major conflict occurred during the early to mid-23rd century. This policy would change in the late 23rd century, however. While being on a Constitution-class vessel was considered a premier billeting, with most officers attempting to get the post, it was probably the most dangerous assignment that anyone would be given. To the point, the ships that were destroyed included, but weren't limited to, the USS Constellation, which was destroyed by the Doomsday Machine, the USS Defiant, not that one, but this one, which was lost in an interphasing anomaly between dimensions with all crew members on board going crazy and killing each other, the USS Excalibur and USS Lexington, along with two other ships of the same class that were destroyed during a training mission when an AI went insane. The USS Executor was never destroyed, but its crew was literally turned into salt. And the USS Intrepid, a vessel that was specifically designed for Vulcans that was destroyed by a space amoeba. Now that's not to say there weren't starships that didn't survive. These included the USS Eagle, a Constitution class that was designed for the Andorians, the USS Republic, the Potemkin, and the USS Hood. And there were some others, but their role in continuity is murky. Needless to say, being on a Constitution class was a roll of the dice. And yet everyone wanted to do it. The most well-known vessel is, of course, that of the USS Enterprise. No bloody A, B, C, or D. What's interesting is analyzing the Enterprise before and after the Federation-Klingon War of 2256 to 2257. What's fascinating is that, if you look at the Federation technology, it was extremely advanced, and these ships were equipped with all kinds of computer systems and automation. This included things like the holographic projectors that would allow officers to interact with others on the bridge itself. Unfortunately, these were so advanced that they made everything volatile. The holographic system even disabled the USS Enterprise at a critical juncture in Federation history. After the war with the Klingons, Constitution-class vessels, and presumably others as well, scaled down their technology as well as the advancements. These systems were more of a liability than anything else, and a need for reliable low-tech defense systems that were basic was a key focus.
Starfleet is not a military organization. Its purpose is exploration.
The result of this meant that the vessels of the mid-23rd century would not be reflective of themselves just 5 to 10 years earlier. It would be an amazing surprise that this non-military entity opted for reliable technology that allowed them to use their weapons more easily. While the different variations of the Constitution class would have minor changes here and there on the hull, the overall major design stayed consistent. This included the rounded primary saucer hull that was connected to the secondary or engineering section. The nacelles were attached directly to the engineering section via pylons. The starship was not aerodynamic but could enter orbit of most habitable planets, though landing appears to be impossible as no struts are ever observed. It has been stated a couple of times that there was the ability for saucer separation, but this has never been seen in canon, and is something that they talk about in the background as well as in some books. The interior of the vessel varied based on the current operations of what it was doing as well as the captain's wants and needs. Generally, the coloring involved white and gray with accents of red and blue. Doors would also be multicolored depending on where they led to. While the vessel was created as a battleship that could go toe-to-toe with any major enemy of the Federation,
Starfleet is not a military organization. Its purpose is exploration.
it's important to remember that the preference of Starfleet was in fact exploration. To this end, the vessel would have at least 14 science labs located in the primary hull. The original Constitution class had a main sickbay located on Deck 6 that included a medical lab as well as the Chief Medical Officer's office. Interestingly, because of how new the Final Frontier was, many of the tools that were used in these medical labs were made on the fly. They were made in outer space because things were unknown and they couldn't prepare for what they didn't know about. In 2270, a refit would see the facilities updated with micro-diagnostic tables and an entire stasis unit. The main bridge is located on Deck 1 of the primary hull, as most Federation designs are. I have done an exhaustive and complete breakdown of the various bridges of Starfleet, and so if you wish to see my thoughts on it and why it was a good or bad idea to create the bridge the way they did, I would encourage you to go and watch that video. Check in the top right hand corner for more information. I'm not going to talk about it here because I'd just be repeating myself if I did so, but go check them out. Definitely worth your viewing pleasure. There would also be an officer's lounge and dining area available, the locations of which changed based on the refits available. As an example, the updated Constitution class would have the officer's lounge with viewports that allowed one to see space in the nacelles with games that were available. Another design would have it directly behind the bridge, which would make viewing almost impossible. There would also be 6 recreation rooms which had 3-dimensional chess, holographic rec rooms, think holodeck but less advanced, an arboretum, galley, gymnasium, theater, and a bowling alley. Of particular note would be the chapel that existed here as well, and of course any ancillary religious rooms. While future officers would discuss future practices of religion, more a cultural thing than a religious thing, the Constitution class was one of the last ships to actually have places of worship. While some might argue the use of the holodeck allowed for religious places, based on dialogue and scenes, it would seem more likely that Starfleet adopted a policy of not having anything religious being associated with their vessels, or indeed with Starfleet at all. With every refit, the recreational centers would be expanded and more things added to them. There were 2 briefing rooms that we know of located on Deck 14. Crew quarters would be spread throughout the saucer section, with Deck 5 having accommodations for senior officers. These quarters were often partitioned by a wall or piece of glass and allowed some creature comforts. Bathrooms were also available near the sleeping area. As time progressed, space on the ship started to come at a premium. Officer quarters would be redesigned to one room, with junior officers having to bunk together in closed, quartered bunk beds. Main engineering was located in the secondary hull and controlled main power as well as thrust. The original layout would have a horizontal warp core that was limited in its abilities but would be upgraded in 2270, with the refit having a more powerful vertical warp core that had horizontal intermix areas. Engineering was on Deck 14 and 15 with several ancillary rooms that included the computer monitoring system. Deck 15 was basically main engineering with the equipment that extended many levels below and above the deck itself. The center of the room would have the before-mentioned matter-antimatter warp core. Like everything else on the ship, it was easy to be claustrophobic while in engineering. Because it was important that the vessel arrives as quickly as possible, the reactor circuits of the warp drive would be lined with both lithium and dilithium. The standard cruising of the warp drive or space warp was 6, with a maximum speed of warp 8. Warp 9 was possible with the vessel but came at a high cost and was considered unsafe. Innovations to the system would allow the vessel to travel at warp 11. Now this is of course on the old warp scale, but again, you could ultimately destroy the ship doing it this fast. The fastest the vessel ever traveled though was at warp 15, which apparently can be done by sabotaging the vessel. So if you do things to harm the engine, it goes faster. While towed, the ship could safely maintain warp 22, which leads me to believe that the damage that's caused isn't due to stress on the hull, but the engines not being able to handle the energy output. The Constitution class had twin-port engine impulse drives that allowed for a warp factor of 0.8, or the equivalent fusion explosion of 97 megatons. For those interested, the largest nuclear weapon ever tested to date is around 25 megatons. The vessel would, of course, come with transporter systems that allowed for transportation over expansive ranges. It usually included a main platform with 6 pads and a console that controlled the transportation process. Depending on the refit, the operator would either be directly in front of those being transported or behind a wall. This could be likely due to the possibility of danger for the officer when transporting something or someone in. While never confirmed in dialogue, looking at the shuttle bay as well as scenes from the different shows seem to indicate that the Gallifreyan Federation alliance had taken full root. We can tell this because when we take a look at the shuttle bay, it apparently can hold up to 4 different vessels, and any ancillary shuttle bays can't hold much more. However, we always see tons of shuttles coming out of these bays that couldn't possibly fit there. These shuttles were generally Class F, but others included drones as well as starfighters somehow. Again, it had like 600 other shuttles inside of there, giving Voyager its inspiration. This definitely not ship of war would have impressive tactical systems.
Starfleet is not a military organization. Its purpose is exploration.
In the 2250s, the ship would have directed energy weapons with enough power to level a half of a continent, or stun an entire planet. In the late 2250s, phaser banks were added, with each of them having a single emitter and power supply. These banks could hit at approximately 90,000 kilometers, or 55,923 miles, and they were able to stun, heat, and disintegrate objects. The original configuration included several forward emitters on the lower part of the ventral side, as well as aft firing banks below the shuttle bay on the secondary hull. Mid-phasers also existed, allowing for a full firing arc. In the 2270s, 3 dual phaser emitters are added to the dorsal side of the primary hull, and the weapons would draw directly from the warp drive, giving unlimited firing potential and immense power, but it had the drawback of damaging the weapons if used for too long, and would become unusable if the main power was cut off. There would be 6 forward-mounted torpedo tubes on the underside of the vessel, with 1 to the aft on the secondary hull. The refit would have 2 firing torpedo launchers that could fire 2 at once before being reloaded. The shields of the vessel used a grid pattern that was subdivided into 4 segments. These shield segments would be referred to as, wait for it, shields 1 through 4. The shields could, in theory, take the detonation of 360 photon torpedoes, though this never seemed to be the case when we watch it on screen. The best way to defeat the shielding was through sustained phaser bombardment, and then the use of photon torpedoes to destroy the ship. The Constitution class was one of the most powerful vessels, and I have to admit, the only vessel that makes the most sense. When it was put together and we watch it on screen, it seems to work how I would imagine vessels in space to work. When we get to the Galaxy class, the Defiant class, or anything in the Disco era Trek, this seems to go more to the science fiction route than science reality. As I've admitted before, I'm more of the Next Generation fan as well as Deep Space Nine, but I have to say I do love the Constitution. And the fact that it had gelato doesn't hurt. But these are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to rate, comment, subscribe, and guys, I'll see you on the next Lore Reloaded.